comes to mind when you think of a palm tree? You probably imagine a warm, humid, tropical environment like a jungle, or a balmy beach like in the Caribbean. But palms don't just grow in tropical places close to the equator. In fact, right here in the United States, we've got several varieties of native palms. If you haven't done so already, be sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you never miss a dose of nature in the city. Here we go. I'm obviously not in Cleveland, Ohio today. I'm in Savannah, Georgia at Skidaway Island State Park. And you can clearly see the landscape here is different. Even though it's only mid-March, there's evergreen trees and plants, Spanish moss hanging from the trees, and of course, a lot of these unusual looking palms. Sabal palms include the cabbage palmetto, like the one behind me, as well as dwarf palmettos, and there's other species of palm that are native to the southeast. One thing that's unique about sabal palmettos is that, unlike their close relatives, say the coconut palm, which live in tropical areas, sabal palms live in pretty far north locations. In fact, they're the group of palms that are the second most further north in the world. They're even tolerant of the occasional frost and light snowfall that's rare but possible anywhere across the southeast, like here in southeast Georgia outside of Savannah. Sabal palms have a long history of important economic uses. Their fronds, when dried, can become really good thatch for making roofs, and many Native Americans did likewise and used the fronds and fibers from sabal palms. The heart of the palm, which is just underneath the growing point of this palm, is edible and very tender and has a cabbage-like flavor. And so for that, sabal palmettos sometimes get the name cabbage palm or cabbage palmetto. Now, that will completely kill the plant altogether, but when done in a limited fashion, it was a really good food source for a lot of Native Americans living on the southeast coast. Sabal palms are technically considered the state tree of South Carolina, but they're not actually a tree at all. In fact, palm trees aren't true trees. Actual trees are going to have layered bark with like the cambium layer and other components and a complex vessel system. A palm is essentially just woody fibers with one sort of ring-shaped circulatory system going up towards the crown. And there's only one point of growth called the apex bud or the terminal bud, where all the new fronds emerge from. This is remarkably different from a true tree, which again has complex woody components, multiple branches, multiple bud structures, lateral buds, terminal buds, flower buds, etc. So much more simple and more quote-unquote primitive from an evolutionary standpoint. Structure and function. Sabal palms and other palms that are similar have ancestors that date back many millions of years, going back to the age of the dinosaurs. They were one of the first flowering plants to become really common across a very warm and tropical earth. And again, most palms are restricted to tropical and subtropical areas, with sabal palms almost reaching temperate climate zones. The two most common palms in the southeast, as I mentioned earlier, we have the cabbage palm or sabal palmetto, but then we also have one called the dwarf palmetto, and it's easily confused. The biggest difference is those sabal palms have a trunk, and they look like a palm tree, like you would expect, whereas the dwarf palmettos lack a trunk or have a barely discernible trunk, and they're often in the ground growing right out of swamps and water sometimes. Those fronds are just as big and grand as their close cousin, the cabbage palms, but again, they're down into the ground. They're dwarfs. Somewhat younger sabal palms have this very notched bark covering their trunks, while others, as they mature and grow tall, can develop that quintessential smooth palm trunk that we're used to thinking of when we think of palm trees. but they kind of do look more like a giant pineapple when they have lots of these knobs and hairs on their trunks. Another species of palm that's native to the Southeast is called saw palmetto. For you health food addicts, you might recognize saw palmetto as an herbal supplement that supposedly cures many ailments. While I'm not going to lay claim to that, I'll tell you, seeing this beautiful ground-dwelling palm really makes me happy and excited to be somewhere warm at this time of year. Saw palmettos have a uniquely fan-shaped frond that makes them stand out from the sort of odd-looking fronds from sable palms that are a mix of a feather-shaped and a fan-shaped, what we call a mix of pinnate and palmate. Saw palmettos grow on the ground here and are deep evergreen plants that can be really, really spiky and thorny to walk through. Some of my colleagues who've worked in the Southeast have many frond memories, I should say, of walking through saw palmetto and getting some pretty bad cuts. Thankfully, the density here is pretty low and the beauty is pretty high. Needle palm is also found in this region and is one of the most cold-hardy palms, able to survive brief temperatures below 0 Fahrenheit. Down here along the Georgia coast, sometimes palms can get so dense and thick, they form what are called palm hammocks, thick mini jungles of nothing but cabbage palms and dwarf palmettos growing sometimes right out of the water in the swamp, like what you see behind me here. Just gazing at these palms with their barren trunks really gives this area a primordial kind of feel. I can almost picture a T-Rex around the corner or something like that at a time when the earth was very warm and fan palms and palmettos were dominant across the landscape. It's something that you really only get a feeling like this when you travel to warm subtropical and tropical places like the Southeastern United States along the coast here. Now, palmettos aren't the only kind of plant growing in these southeastern coastal swamps. Towering above me, believe it or not, are pine trees. Trees like loblolly pine, slash pine, and the occasional longleaf pine dominate southern forest ecosystems, especially in the coastal plain, often with an understory of palms. So two unexpected trees you don't expect to see in the Southeast United States: palm trees that are not fully tropical and pine trees that love a hot climate. Now, the coastal Southeast has a reputation for being swampy, and that's well deserved. But not all is lost in a swamp. You can see around me that the ground here is actually fairly dry. And that's because there's a lot of marine deposits and sand deposits and other things. So there are areas that are high and dry and well drained. In fact, on this path that I'm on right now, there's barely any mud. And behind me, there's even a campground where you can pitch a tent and stay perfectly dry. Well, I think I might have misspoke. Palmettos aren't the only thing that characterizes the Southeast. You will probably notice tons of this stuff draped over trees called Spanish moss. And what's fascinating about Spanish moss is it's an epiphyte. Epiphytes are plants that grow on other trees, and they get all the nutrients and everything they need from the air. They're not rooted in the ground, and they generally don't harm the trees that they cling onto. Spanish moss is everywhere, and what's amazing also about Spanish moss, it's not a moss at all. In fact, it's more closely related to a pineapple. Spanish moss is in the bromeliad family that includes pineapples and many other ornamental plants that are often in tropical and subtropical places, with Spanish moss reaching its northern extent to about southeast Virginia. And you can see here in the Southeast, it can cover just about any old tree and lots of other things, giving that spooky, eerie southern feel. Indeed, palmettos are great, and Alex Palmer loves palms. But let's take some time and a moment of zen to explore and admire some of the other plants and wildlife and scenery of the coastal southeastern United States. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Alex, and I'm your CLE Urban Naturalist.